if I could tell you a little bit about the Entrepreneur in Residence program we're going to do this year. We're going to have a couple of things going that you might be interested in. Number one is we're going to have a two-speaker series. The first one starts tonight with Dennis McWilliams, which is an entrepreneur, what we're going to call Entrepreneur Live. So look out for Entrepreneur Live. An Entrepreneur Live will be an entrepreneur that has built at least 2 businesses and sold at least 1. And Dennis is on his 2nd business he's building. And so these are seasoned entrepreneurs who live the life, the good, bad, and the ugly, perhaps, of what entrepreneurship is all about. And so it's great experiential learning for you all. The second speaker series is going to be called Money Talks. And every month there'll be at least one person who's in some form of capital for businesses, whether it's angel investors, angel networks, venture capitalists, private equity, etc. So you can listen to what these people look for when you might be growing a business or thinking about a business, and who you should get capital from and what conditions under which that capital is there. I'll also have office hours. My office is 6.440 in McWilliams School, and any of you that wish to sit and talk about business or want some advice on some aspect of that business, if you will send me an email, my card will be here. It will be laura.kilcrease@mccombs.edu. McCombs.utexas.edu. Edu, thank you. Yeah. But there'll be some businesses here.
It'll be on the website, yeah.
And they'll be on the website. Thank you. And I'll have office hours, or we'll set some appointments to help you out in any way you can. But tonight is our first night, and we thank you for coming. And we have a phenomenal speaker in Dennis McWilliams. Dennis is CEO and founder of Apollo Endosurgery, a medical device company focused on I can't say this, Dennis. Endoluminal?
Endoluminal. Yes,
Endoluminal, yeah. Thank you. And natural orifice surgery. These flexible devices enable common surgical procedures to be conducted through patients' natural orifices, significantly reducing the pain and recovery time for both minor and major surgical interventions. The company is based on technology from the University of Texas Medical Branch, Johns Hopkins University, Medical University of South Carolina, and the Mayo Clinic. Mr. McWilliams has a broad base of entrepreneurial experience in both medical devices and drug therapies. Prior to Apollo, Mr. McWilliams was an entrepreneur in residence at PTV Sciences, a venture capital fund, focusing on life science and medical devices. And prior to that, he co-founded Chrysalis Biotechnology, a development stage biopharmaceutical company focused on developing novel drug therapies for tissue regeneration, including bone cartilage and dermal soft tissue. As Chief Operating Officer, he was responsible for corporate financing, strategic partnering, and M&A activities, having raised over $15 million in financing for that company and signing 3 major corporate partnerships. Chrysalis was successfully acquired by Orthologic Corporation in August of 2004. I think I'll leave it at that, even though you have many other attributes, including Dennis being a great entrepreneur, both starting out as an entrepreneur or an intern at the Austin Technology Incubator, and then joining that, from whence he then went on to build his own businesses.
Great.
Dennis, tell us about your entrepreneurship journey and what you're doing today.
Yeah, no, certainly, and I apologize ahead of time. I'm so ingrained in giving venture capital in investment banker pitches with the crutch of PowerPoint, that with the power failure, so forgive me, but please keep it interactive, ask questions as we come through. But as Laura mentioned, right now I'm running a company called Apollo Endosurgery. We've been at Apollo for 7 years. Started it as employee number 1. Literally at a coffee shop on 360 and Bee Caves, or 360 and Westlake Boulevard. And we've now grown that company to over 45 employees. We've raised over $60 million in venture capital money to date. And we're commercializing our product today in the United States and starting in Europe Q4 this year. So I've taken both that and then Chrysalis from really employee 1 or 2 all the way to really commercial realization. And what I think it's useful to talk about, I mean, I assume that most of you are here because you have some interest in becoming an entrepreneur. That would be the general assumption that I would make as to why you would give up a gorgeous Tuesday afternoon to come sit at the AT&T Center as nice as it is. But it might be useful, Laura, just to talk a little bit about the history of how I kind of fell into this, because my undergraduate is in aerospace engineering. In fact, that was my first teacher that I was talking to. I don't know if you were here beforehand, Noel Clemens. I was in his first class at UT Aerospace Department when he was a first-year professor. He's now chairman of the aerospace department, and I'm now running a medical device company. So it's funny how things go. I had no intention necessarily of getting into medical devices when I started my career. But I think most entrepreneurs kind of find that way. I mean, you just have that entrepreneurial drive. And for me, when I graduated from UT undergrad, I was looking for a transition degree to get into business somehow. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was doing some software startup things at that time. And so Stanford had a program, which I think now UT has really replicated with what John and IC Squared and now Laura, you've had a long part of that with the kind of this management and engineering management master's program, and Stanford had one of those, and it was really the only program like that. It was for engineers to, depending on your definition, detoxify us or retrain us in a way to be able to run businesses. And so I did that, and I had the fortune of becoming an intern at an incubator, a NASA-run incubator that ironically was run by Laura Kilcrease and funded by George Kosmetsky. I had all these grand visions of I had the entrepreneurial bug. I actually went to a course like this. Stanford had a course like this, and unfortunately, they had a little better first speaker. Our first speaker was Steve Jobs. So I apologize that you're getting Dennis McWilliams instead, but
you are our Steve Jobs.
Yeah, that's crazy, but. What an amazing guy. This was it was an interesting time for Steve because he was in the middle of it was probably the low point of his entrepreneurial career because he had started Apple, he had been pushed out of Apple. It was a horrible time for him in the early 90s. He had started Pixar and nobody really knew what was going to happen with Pixar. And then he was running Next Computer and trying to figure out how to retake over Apple. And I'll still forget it. He came up in a classroom like that, sat on a desk in his black turtleneck thing and had no prepared comments or slides and asked us for questions. And, who the hell is going to ask Steve Jobs a question as a master's student? So, but anyway, those were the sparks and the inspirations for me. And, Michael Dell was, doing his thing here in Austin. And so I decided then that I wanted to be an entrepreneur and start a company and assumed I was going to do it in the software space. And so I went to Laura and to George Kosmetsky and said, hey, I'd like to come work for you guys. I want to come back to Austin and work on my entrepreneurial experience. And they graciously offered me an internship at $10 an hour. I was a Stanford master's. They pay a little better now, but it was one of those things that I had. I had some other job offers and stuff, and I really made the decision that I made the conscious decision that I wanted to make an investment in my career, and so decided to take it. Moved back to Austin, and first day on the job, I kind of thought I was going to be working on NASA-related technologies and things like that. Ended up being sent to the University of Texas Medical Branch to catalog technologies, and that was my first day on the job. I knew nothing about life sciences, medical devices. I literally went to the medical school library and bought a medical dictionary because I met with these professors and just looked like I knew what they were talking about. And that was 1994. And so it's just funny how different decisions you make in your career will guide you where you want to go. But I think for an entrepreneur, that's kind of part of the process, Laura. I think you end up, you make the decision you want to do it, and really you have to let the opportunity dictate where you really end up. And for me, it was having that perch at IC Squared, seeing the deal flow come in, and it happened to be medical deal flow. Next thing you know, I've been doing medical and life sciences for 16 years.
So when you saw those deals, those technologies coming in, were you consciously looking for one at that time, thinking, I'll find one here and I'll start a company with it?
Yeah, no, I was. And that was, when I give this talk, and if I were to have PowerPoint slides, I have one of my favorite slides to talk about this is having a perch. When you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to have a spot in life that allows you to see these opportunities, and that can. And again, you got to think about that for a perch from a life perspective. It just doesn't mean just being in a position to see deal flow. You could be unemployed and sit around and find a way to see deal flow. It's a way that you can survive that as a person. So, for me, I was recently married, and we didn't have kids at the time, and so I could invest not making a lot of money to get that deal flow. And that's a key piece of it is because, and what happens, Laura, is like I remember like the first few deals that I saw when I was at IC Squared, I loved them. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to go do this. And I'd talk to you or I'd talk to George, and you guys would just smile and know that the deal sucked and that it was never going to go anywhere.
We will try and discourage you a little bit.
Yeah, discourage a little. And what you learn is you start to see that investor's mind. And that's why I'm a huge fan of the Entrepreneur Residence Program. And for you guys, it's a great resource to have somebody like Laura to talk to, because so much of being an entrepreneur is picking the right deal. And you're going to pick the wrong deal sometimes. And and what I would hope for you is you'd learn how to kill it quickly. If you're in a bad deal, it's a bad deal. Find the gracious exit so you can go do the next one, because you have to be in a deal that you can be the most potent entrepreneur in the world, but if you're digging your well where there's no oil, it's not going to do you much good. And so I think learning that deal flow, and that's what venture capitalists are actually pretty good about. I mean, they see a lot of deal flow, they triage it really quickly, they find deals that they like, and then even when they make investments, they're making decisions consciously of who gets money and who doesn't. So for me, it was critical.
So even though you had that perch, as you called it, was the journey smooth once you started that first company?
No, because you think you're so smart and you realize you know nothing.
When do you realize this? The day after you get in the deal?
About 3 years ago. I don't know. So, it takes a while. I think you realize, once you start having success and you look back as to what's driving that success, you realize how little you know. And actually, it's a really enabling thing. And there's a tendency with entrepreneurs when you start a company, and you're the only employee, you do everything, right? You're the expert on finance, you're the expert on fundraising, you're the expert on the technology, you do the marketing plan, you do the business plan, you're the expert on everything. And part of being a successful entrepreneur is being able to transition from that to actually running a company where, my job as CEO today is not to be the expert on sales and marketing. My job as CEO is to get the world's best sales and marketing expert for our technology and make them work for Apollo. That's my job today. And that's a tough transition, because entrepreneurs, we tend to hold on to things and be controlling of them. And if you look at most of the successful entrepreneurs, they've learned that, hey, I don't know everything. That's okay that I don't know everything. Build my plan, assuming that, and then build a team that gets the expertise around the table to do that. And that's probably one of the toughest things to learn to manage as an entrepreneur, and is to make that transition.
So what's the transition in your mind from starting up with no product to today having product and raising recently, in February, I think, $51 million for the next stage of growth of Apollo?
So I would say, number one, you have to have good technology. So again, back to the first point, you have to fundamentally have something that fits the market and is going to work. But two, then you start to realize, well, everybody has that. Or not everybody. I mean, when you see deal flow in a venture capital firm, you realize there are a lot of crappy deals out there, and there's a lot of junk coming through that's never going to do well. But what you learn is that the ones that are actually getting traction and pitching the venture capitalists, most all of them have really good technology. I mean, that's typically, there's tons of technology out there. And Laura, this as a current and former investor in a variety of different things. The trick is, what are the other elements of your company that are going to make it successful? And venture capitalists, the first thing they look at is team. And that's really hard when you're a first-time entrepreneur. When I was raising money for Chrysalis Biotech, I had no wins on my resume. And so, when we would go pitch to venture capitalists, I was co-running the company with a PhD scientist, and they're the only thing that venture capitalists like less than a first-time CEO is a science-based CEO. And so that was a real challenge for us, was raising money because of that. But if you can hang on and kind of get through that first deal, whether you're the CEO or a VP or something, getting that badge of honor, that becomes real key, because the venture capitalists, to be honest, they don't really know how to run your company. They're really smart people, but they have no real idea about what's going on a day-to-day basis. And again, their job is to make sure that you do. And so, that's, again, the number one thing. Again, assume everybody has great technology. What does your team look like? Is your team the right team to do it? And then also, you got to realize that over time, as the company grows, that team and the requirements of that team are going to change. And sometimes that means that the people that you hired early on aren't the people that need to be there when you go to the next phase. And that's a real stressful transition as well.
How do you work to grow your team?
Well, first, obviously you have to have the money, right? You have to have the cash to be able to do it. And so, that's a big catch-22 for a lot of companies. Well, we'd like to go hire the team, but until we have money, we can't get the team here. And so, we would do some little tricks that, like everybody does, which is, you build an advisory network, and the advisory network is not just technical experts. Sometimes it's a sales and marketing expert. We would bring people on contingency. So we'd say, look, we're going to pay you a half salary. And if we close our round with your name and with your help, then we'll put you to full salary. So we did some things like that. But at some point, you have to have capital to convince good talent to come. And then I think as a CEO, you have to be able to communicate a vision of excitement and enthusiasm for your company where top talent wants to come to your organization. And it's tough sometimes to realize that that's your job when it's more fun to go work in the lab.
So when you're recruiting top talent, does not just the company, but the location and proximity to other businesses help?
Yeah, I would say the better talent, they've got, those are really big on the concern list. Is like, where am I going to live? Where's my family going to live? Hey, if it doesn't work out, if Apollo doesn't work out and I move my family down there, what else can I do? And so, in Austin, that's been a challenge in life sciences and medical device. We don't quite have critical mass yet. So if I hire a director of marketing, for example, and he's doing fine, by the way, he shouldn't get paranoid about me talking about him, but if it were not, and something were to happen to Apollo, there aren't many director of marketing jobs available here in Austin for a medical device guy. And so that's a tough sell, but you balance all that. So with Apollo, it was, well, once we were able to raise a lot of money and had really solid investors behind us, we could go to talent like that and we could say, hey, look, we've got really good financial backing. Your risk is lower. It's worth you coming here. And not only that, if you come here, we've got a young team. This is not going to be our only startup. Once we sell Apollo or take an IPO, we're going to do another one. And then that type of enthusiasm, you can kind of build off that oftentimes.
Over time, as a venture capitalist, I've seen a lineage coming out of companies, meaning the first CEO will do a few companies, and then the directors underneath that become subsequent VPs, and they go off and do a company. Do you think that's going to happen, Apollo?
For life sciences, that's my dream. Would be. I mean, and if you look at life science clusters around the country, whether it's San Diego or the Boston area or North Carolina, I mean, there are companies like that did really well and then spun off talent, and they all started companies. Greatest success with Apollo, other than returning a bunch of money to my investors, would be to have 3 or 4 startup companies spin out, and they'll be able to raise money because people will know that they've been through a success and the challenges of growing Apollo, and that'll make them more fundable. So certainly, that's you realize that's exactly what happened in the high tech boom in the 80s, a lot of times, like economic development people and chamber people, they get real upset when companies get acquired. But man, sometimes that's the greatest thing in the world because you got a lot of people who've got money in their pocket who want to start a new company and they don't want to move their families. And so that's a big inspiration for those clusters to grow. And we haven't had that in Austin Life Sciences yet.
We've had it perhaps in software and gaming and some other areas.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
perhaps you're going to be the pioneer for us and
know.
get going in the life
I don't
sciences.
know. Yeah, we can hope, right? So.
You think proximity to the university here is helpful?
Yeah, proximity is important. The big thing that we're lacking right now in Austin from a life science perspective is a medical school. And I don't know if you guys follow that, but that's a huge effort right now. And it looks like that actually may happen. There's an effort ongoing right now. UT Systems committed money for a medical school. Seton's going to build the new hospital for it. And there's this tax thing that's going to happen in November. And if that tax thing passes, we should end up getting a medical school here, and that'll be transformational for the community, and not just for me and the life science industry, but also for the talent that it'll bring in and the quality of healthcare. So I've actually been trying to help out a lot on that, and a lot of the CEOs have because they just will change Austin and the face of Austin in a very positive way.
Dennis, you were very successful in getting a grant from CIPRI, the Cancer Prevention Institute. In fact, I talked to the chairman, and you were one of only 3 companies out of 90 that applied for the first round of grants. Has that been helpful to you? Outside, of course, the money is always helpful.
Yeah, no, the Cypriot thing, those guys were heroes for us because it was funny, at Apollo, we raised $47 million in February, and everybody's like, oh, wow, it was great. You're a huge success. It was really easy. Well, we were starving before that. I mean, we had two solid investors, PTV here locally, and then a group called HIG Capital out of the East Coast who were very supportive of us, but we all knew that just those two investors weren't going to be able to help it. They didn't have enough capital that they could commit just to Apollo to get us where we needed to go, and we were going to have to get external capital. And I still remember, so 2008, we had a tremendous year at Apollo. We'd hit all of our milestones. The products were going really well. We had our pitch, our Series B pitch was all pulled together. It was going to be a slam dunk Series B. I literally was going out to Sand Hill Road. They are pitching to VC groups. And I was pitching to VC groups on Sand Hill the week that Lehman collapsed. And you want to talk about some lousy timing. I mean, that was horrible timing. And all the venture guys there were like, yeah, we're really interested. The whole time they're checking their BlackBerries and watching their portfolios just get crushed. And the reaction of the market at that time was to contract. And venture capitalists held all their money in reserves and weren't doing new deals because they knew they had to save their money for their current portfolio deals. And so we went from, fourth quarter of 2008, and we were kind of in denial into 2009. But boy, 2010, we were, like a lot of companies, were struggling. We had to do layoffs, and that's not fun. I had to let go one of my very best friends, who was our head of engineering. And we had to contract, and we went from about 50 employees down to about 22, just to conserve cash and be able to maintain and hit some milestones to get back into position. And fortunately for us, Cypriot came right in the middle of that, came in 2010, and we had really good products which had low risk profiles for Cypriot. So we were able to pitch a business plan to Cypriot. It's like, look, you're a new fund. We think we can be one of your early successes. Here's the funding plan. Here are the milestones that we're going to hit, and here's the team that's going to do it. And that was very powerful for them, and I think that's why we were one of three. And we hit every single one of those milestones. We hit them 3 to 4 months ahead of time. And that gave them a lot of confidence. And then that money really allowed us to hit the milestones that drove the big Series B this year.
Talk about forming your board and how your board came together. Did you get to choose your board members, or did they get to choose
I
you?
got to choose. We have a board of 7. I chose 2 of them. One was me, and the other was an independent. But the board was run by the venture capitalists. I say it's run. I run the board, but the board is dominated by venture capitalists. 5 of the board members are our venture investors. So I have 5 venture capitalists, then myself as the management representative, and then we just brought an independent on board recently. And I actually get to drive that choice, and we were very fortunate there. And again, it's one of those things that when you're starting your business, sometimes you just have to go for the brass ring of talent and go out and find the best people to bring to your business. And whenever you do that, you're going to have success. And so at Apollo, I went to my board and said, hey, let's get an independent. Here's a short list of names. And I gave them like the CEO or the former CEO of like the 3 largest medical device companies in the world. And they just laughed at me and said, well, Dennis, look, if you can get them, that's great. Otherwise, we have some names for you, which I didn't want their names necessarily. And so I went to the first guy on the list, who was the CEO of Covidien US Surgical, which is the largest player in our space, and built a relationship with him, and actually got him to commit to joining the board. So he was our first choice, our only offer, and he started in July, and that was just huge for us. And that combined with our fundraising effort caught a lot of attention for people, and just having somebody who's run a big business before. Because when you have, and again, no offense to Laura as venture capitalist, put your entrepreneur hat on. Venture capitalists, again, you got to realize most of them have never run companies before. And so when you talk to them and you're managing your business, I've heard one of them liken it to, it's like, imagine you're watching a movie, there's a 2-hour movie that's going on, and you only get to see 2-minute snippets of that movie, every 30 minutes. Because that's what your venture board does. They come in, they come to a board meeting, they understand a little bit about what you're doing, they don't really understand what's going on day to day, and then they ask you some tough questions, and then they leave. But they don't really understand what's truly happening at your business a lot of times. And the value of your independent is to truly be that person that me as CEO, I can say, look, I'm really worried about how we're going to launch in Europe. Or, hey, I'm getting pressure from the board to expand into Asia, and I'm nervous about how quickly we're going to be able to do that. Or, I think there's an opportunity for this new product here. And they're a great sounding board for you, and then their job as independent is to sell the rest of the board. And so, actually, I was worried about it when we brought the 3 new venture investors on board, but it's been a great transition for us. And the number one thing to keep your board happy is to hit your milestones. And you hit your milestones, you do what you say you're going to do, your board will like you. So.
Do you select your venture capitalist, or do they select you?
Used to, you could select them, and maybe you can in social media, but that's not the case today. They select you. I mean, we like to think. I say that. I mean, we had competing term sheets on our Series B at Apollo, but that today is not the norm. A lot of times, and particularly in communities like Austin, where you don't have a lot of life science venture capital. I mean, really, there are 2 main venture funds here in Austin. There's PTV and there's Sante, and if you're going to go out and get major syndicated funding, you're going to have to build a relationship with one of those 2 groups, and then you're kind of choosing from a pool of venture capitalists who will actually invest outside the West Coast, and so that's a small pool. And so to some extent, yes, you try to choose them, and you like to say that you choose them if you have multiple options on the board, and that's every CEO's dream, is to have competing term sheets. But most of the time, that's not the case, and you end up, getting the team that you have, and what you make the most of it. And I've learned that you can work with most types of personalities if you just suck it up enough. So.
Oh, if only I'd known that sooner.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right, yeah.
I will note, though, I am a venture capitalist that actually run companies. So
yeah, exactly.
Rather unusual. In this regard, let's open it up to the floor and see if anyone has any questions. We have a microphone that I'd like to, thank you.
Or you can just speak loudly, and I'm happy to repeat the questions.
But we'd like to try and get you on tape if we can. So any questions for Dennis so far? Otherwise, I have lots of other questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you sort of came into the whole medical devices field with very little knowledge at all. So how exactly did you go about building your skill set to where you could go actually start a medical devices company?
It's a really good question, and it's not the normal way to do it. In fact, my background would have suggested I would have gone into software. But again, what happened is so much of being a successful entrepreneur is just getting the relevant in the ground, on the street experience. And so you get that however you can. And for me, it just happened that, when I was working for IC Squared and for Laura and George, they sent me in. I spent a year and a half writing business plans for new technologies. And I was able to convince the founders of the first company, the scientific founder, that he needed a business generalist, that I in no means was the technical expert, but he needed somebody who could, do the investor pitch, run the financial books, help with all the other different aspects of that business. And once I get myself into that generalist position, I was just able to build knowledge by surrounding myself with smart consultants. So, I learned how to write regulatory filings by, we found the best consultant in the country in medical devices, and I learned from him on how to do it. And so, it was just kind of, and then over time, we just had the fortune at Chrysalis. I had 7 years there, and in 7 years, you learn a lot, and you make a lot of mistakes, and you learn the actual part of how to build a device company or a drug company, but then you actually learn kind of the more important part, which is what is it really like running a startup? I mean, what is the human side of it? How do you manage the stress of not having money and not going to be able to make payroll? That's what investors really look for. They want to make sure you have domain knowledge or that you have domain knowledge, but they want to know how are you going to react when the board comes in and said, you know what, this guy that you really love that's on your team, he's not getting it done, and you got to get rid of him. How are you going to react? Are you going to tell your board and your venture investors, hey, no, you're wrong, I'm right? Well, if you do that, they're going to fire both of you. And so it's those skills that I think over time, if you're going to be the leader of the organization, that they truly look for. And then, now I've got 16 years. I'm a gray hair to some extent in the space. And so, my biggest recommendation is, don't worry so much about the actual technical space that you go into. There are 2 ways to get in. One, you become the technical lead of the organization and you're the science brains. And then, of course, yes, you have to have the, my head of R&D has tremendous experience in the engineering medical device space. But for the business folks, if you're going to take that route to be kind of the business CEO, fundraiser leader, it's really those other skills and just building that experience that's going to be critical and help you do it. And so, however you can build it. If it's working for free as an intern at a startup, just so you can say that, hey, I interned at Apollo Endosurgery for 2 years, and you can talk about what that was like, or even better, intern at a venture fund. I mean, because that's a great way to see things. However you can get those opportunities would be my recommendation. And don't worry so much about where they're in.
Find your perch.
Yeah, find a perch.
Find
Definitely.
your perch. Other questions?
Okay.
So how did you go about building your first teams for these companies? You mentioned that sometimes you were courting people, and then sometimes there are spin-offs from successful companies. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Chrysalis, it was, I was less in the role there since, we had the scientific founder as CEO. It was more just him and I in thinking we could run it, and then, just kind of, we never really built the team at Chrysalis that we needed to be successful. But of course, we were on Galveston Island, which was not the easiest place in the world to recruit people. I mean, I literally, this is no joke, I married my wife in 2006, knowing 2 weeks later we were going to move to Galveston, Texas to do Chrysalis Biotechnology. I had to give the PowerPoint pitch to her parents. That's not a joke. I sat down at the dinner table and said, this is why I'm moving your daughter from Austin in this great job at IC Squared to go to Galveston, because it was an issue even for me to go there. And so location's really important. But for Apollo, I had PTV has been a great investor, and their experience was focus on getting the best talent around. And so with Apollo, again, I made that comment earlier that the talent at the beginning of the company isn't necessarily the talent that you need as you go along, and that's really tough to learn and to manage when that right time is. So practically speaking, at Apollo, we were building the team. One of my classmates from Stanford, ironically, worked in the medical device catheter space, which is what Apollo was doing. So he actually had the relevant experience. He had done a startup as well as worked in a big company. He was a director of engineering looking to move to VP. And he lived in Florida, and because of the personal relationship, I was able to convince him to move to come to Austin, and he was able to recruit a couple team members that were important for the early formation. And then just through general networking, we found this individual who, a really good feeding ground for stuff like this is the big companies, because big companies are just disasters with managing their talent. They develop talent really well, and then they let it go and fire them, and it makes no sense to me. Some of the best talent is the talent that is fired from the big companies, because typically these are individuals who don't necessarily play well in structured environments, which makes them horrible for executive development within a big company, but make them perfect for startups. So in Apollo's case, there was an individual who came out of one of the big surgical companies, had been let go in some big consolidation. He was the national sales director for their core disposable surgical franchise, which was exactly who we were going to be selling to. And so it was just like a match made in heaven. We told him what we were doing. I had venture backing at the time. We still had to do our Series A, but I had PTV behind me, and it was Austin, Texas, and that was a huge draw. And we were able to get him on board, and then that was the core team. So it was me who had I had a successful exit under my belt with Chrysalis. I had a head of engineering who had domain experience. Then I had this commercial person. So that was the genesis, and then. Unfortunately, as the company grew, we outgrew the experience of my R&D friend, and that and the funding cycles, we had to make a change, and those are really challenging things to manage, and we ended up having to do some different things there. But knowing when that time is and when to make those changes, that's the hardest thing as a CEO is knowing how your talent fits where your organization is going. And you don't have the money, frankly, all the time to go do it, because the venture capitalists hold that capital back. And so, just make sure you have all the boxes checked. And then if you can't afford the person full time, just make sure you have the experience on your board as a consultant or as an advisor.
There's another question.
Hey, so of course I've got like a million questions I would love to ask you, but I'm just going to pick two of them.
Okay. Great.
So one of them is, I've heard that the days of, Steve Jobs are kind of gone, the days of being able to be an entrepreneur with just a bachelor's degree, and that nowadays people kind of expect to have a master's or even a PhD if you're entering something like the biotech industry. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
So that may be prevailing wisdom. I fundamentally just disagree with that premise. And I think you're seeing that, unfortunately. I think in venture funds in particular, venture funds are hiring more PhDs and more MDs. And you need that expertise and that talent on the venture side. But the problem is that again, they've never really necessarily run companies. And one of the big jobs of a management team is, you can't really be married to the technology, because sometimes it's like to say that your job is to say that the baby's ugly. And you have to be able to dispassionately look at technology and say, is this product or this technology doing for us what we need to be able to do? And the problem is a lot of time PhDs or MDs, they get so enamored with the technology that they don't really realize that, well, the reimbursement's never going to work for that. Or, the strategic acquirers aren't really interested in that space and they're not going to care about that technology. Or you're never going to be able to manufacture that product for the price that you need to be able to manufacture it for. And so I think it's been an unfortunate trend that you're starting to see backtrack a little bit. And the people who are raising venture funds now, you're actually seeing more of the operational people come back into venture capital, which I think is a great trend. And you're seeing that back reflected into the team. So I think certainly for a technical route, if you're going to be the head of R&D for a biotech company, they're going to want to see a master's or PhD, most likely for that type of position. I'll be honest, when I look at resumes, I don't even look at their, they need to have a bachelor's degree, and for certain positions, we like to have an MBA, but, particularly in medical devices, most successful heads of R&D of medical devices don't have PhDs, and they don't like to hire PhDs. And that's not a knock on PhDs, but again, the problem, there's such a difference in basic research and product development. And product development, the goal is to get something out the door in a reasonable period of time. And it's not necessarily a scientific endeavor. And that's a tough transition, I think, for PhDs sometimes who have been working on a thesis. You've been doing that for a long period of time. And so much about a PhD is just the scientific knowledge that's gained from that process, which is an extremely valuable societal benefit. That can be a killer in a startup company when you're trying to hit a timeline. And look, the product's not perfect, but it hits these reasonable criteria that we've established, and let's launch it and see what happens.
So Dennis, would you say that for the folks here in the audience that they could go get experience in the type of businesses or entrepreneurial businesses, and that would be equally important to?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what we look for is we look for experience, and we hire interns at Apollo, and all those interns have gone on to good industry positions because that experience is really important. And so it's not to say that that's and again, there's a little bit of a difference between like medical device and diagnostic companies versus like true biotech, like gene therapy. Gene therapy, that's hard stuff. And so you need a PhD to be able to manage and understand those types of things. And you see, a predominance of higher level degrees there. For medical devices, at the end of the day, it's a widget, it's a thing, and it's a different talent mix that you tend to see there. So, yeah, Laura, I would stress just it's the actual corporate experience for a startup company. That's probably the most important thing.
And perhaps to highlight this a little bit more, what do customers buy, technology or benefits?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they buy the benefits of that product, and so at the end of the day, it could be the greatest technology in the world, but if it doesn't relate to what the customer needs, it doesn't matter. Or the classic one you see is like somebody comes up with in nanotechnology, and I don't mean to burst any nanotechnology bubbles here, but that nanotechnology was so hot in the 90s and early 2000s. And it was the hammer looking for the nail. It was like, wow, we could do this really great nanomedical delivery of drugs for cancer. And it's like, yes, you could, but you're competing against other drug delivery, liposomal drug delivery, or some other drug delivery, which cost a fraction of it, which was easier to use and better for the patient. And nanotech was overkill and not needed for that. And so, those are some classic mistakes that you see. And Laura, you're right. At the end of the day, you got to realize what your value proposition is for your customer. And technology needs to be the vehicle that gets you there.
Had a second question?
Yeah, thank you. So my second question was, you talked a lot about people having the killer technology. Mm-hmm. And so say I and a group of my friends have some technology that we think is killer. Uh-huh. How do we know that it actually is that killer technology? And then once we've had a chance to develop it, how do we know when it's the right time to get capital?
Well, those are really excellent questions. And You got to be careful though with that, right? Because sometimes the people that you're asking are the competition, and you want to be careful with your technology ideas. But at the same time, if your idea is not protectable and you can't share it with anybody, then you don't have a protectable business. And so, the things that I look for is, everybody likes to say, well, I have great technology because there's no competition for what we do. That actually scares me, because if you don't have competition, I don't have any benchmark to understand how your technology fits. Apollo, we had what we thought was good technology, and we didn't think we had competition necessarily on the way we made our devices and the route of administration, but we compete heavily against surgical device manufacturers. And so I think knowing how you compare to competition and understanding the competition really well is the first piece. Secondly, I would go to experts in the field. And so, whatever your space is, in my space, it's the medical device surgical companies. I would go ask surgeons, ask the customer. It's amazing how many business plan entrepreneurs don't actually ask the customer. And when I say the customer, I mean it's not necessarily the person who uses the technology, it's the person who pays for the technology. And so if it's social media, the customer isn't the end user. The customer is the person who's paying for the ads that benefit from the end user. And it's amazing how many times people miss that and they don't actually talk to that customer. So talk to that customer. And then 3, know your exit. Because at the end of the day, venture capitalists care about one thing. They care about your vision to some extent, but they give you money not so you can execute their vision or your vision. They give you money because they want money back. And they want more money back than you gave them. And your vision is that vehicle to get you there, or get them there, or get their money there. And so, talk to the eventual acquirers of your company. So if it's a software deal, find out what the software acquirers are looking for and say, hey, here's roughly what we're talking about. If we could do this and we could execute on this and we could hit these milestones, do we have something? Is that interesting to you? And be totally honest about that. I mean, no matter how much you love your technology, don't be afraid to hear. In fact, you want to hear the negative. Ask them like, what's bad about what we're doing? Because the venture capitalists, if you don't do it, the VCs are going to do it. And if you don't know those answers and haven't done that, you're going to look stupid to them, and they're not going to want to give you money. And then the second part of you actually asked 3 questions. The second part, like when do I go to venture capital? Really, I wouldn't go to venture capital until I've really put together. You don't have to know the plan from beginning to exit, but you need to know really what your financing strategy is going to be. So, in medical device, the classic model was $5 million to $7 million Series A, $15 million Series B to do your pilot thing, and then a $30 million Series C to do your commercialization. And you would have to make sure that your milestones, from a corporate development standpoint, mapped up with those funding scenarios. So $5 million, you had to go, be able to hit a meaningful milestone with what you're doing. So you need to make sure you have that generally mapped out for your industry. So if it's our first step is we're going to raise $1 million in seed financing, and then we're going to do these 3 big milestones with it. And then from that seed financing, we're going to raise a $5 million Series A, and we're going to do these 3 things. Know that in your brain, because ultimately then you have to make that map all the way to your exit. So if you say your exit for your deal is it's a $100 million exit, you can back in whether the model works. And the venture capitalists are looking for a 5x to 10x return. And so if you say, hey, you're going to put in $10 million into this deal over the life of these milestones, and the deal in the best of markets is going to sell for 30, they're not going to do it. And so you got to be able to run that equation and then be able to convince them that that $100 million exit is real.
Dennis, do you think, addressing the front part of that question, do you think while these folks are still members of the university, students studying, that it's a great time for them, if they're thinking about being an entrepreneur and they have an idea, to actually go ask those tough questions?
It's such a great time because you have such a great end. Because everybody wants to help a student, right? We all do. We're all suckers for the student who calls. I'm working on this project. Can you help us? And everybody wants to see that be successful. And there have been good successes of Moot Corp that have come out and different things. But it's such a great environment because everybody wants to help you and everybody wants you to be successful. And you have tremendous resources around you and use them and take advantage of them. So get your team together, map out really what you want to do, what everybody's roles are, and then just test it. Tell the story, retell the story. Get the negative feedback. Go solve it in your brains how you're going to manage that. And take advantage of all the tremendous talent here at UT. And then, frankly, they have the relationships with the venture capitalists as well, because you never want to go in cold to venture capitalists. Hunter Lentz is here. I'll out him. He's actually works with a venture fund, and if you could really if he was allowed to answer honestly, what happens to business plans who are emailed kind of unprovided to the fund, they don't get strong consideration, and
You're
that's
not supposed to be giving these secrets.
yeah,
away,
I
Dennis.
know, and the reason it's not because they're bad people, because they get hundreds of business plans a month, and so the easiest way to triage a business plan is, well, what's the source of the plan? How did I get this from? Did it come from a validated source? Do I trust the source that it's come from? If you don't have that, the bar is so much higher to get noticed by them. And so, look at the venture, if you have a target venture fund, find someone that venture fund trusts who will take that and say, look, this may not be right for you, but you should take a look at it. That's the only way to be successful with venture capital, I think. So.
I totally agree with Dennis that you have to get to know the people as quickly as you can. And just to put a plug in, on the 25th of this month, there'll be Joe Fontenot from Trailblazer Capital here. And so you'll be able to ask him and Hunter's
And
here.
somebody ask him that question. What happens if he gets a business plan emailed to him out of the blue? What he does with it? See what he answers.
Other questions?
So is it traditionally the VC's responsibility to be looking for those opportunities for the end goal, the exit plan, I guess, for those companies that might acquire your company, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, so it's the number one thing that the venture person is trying to figure out when they present your plan. So is the plan doable? If you hit the metrics and the milestones that you say you're going to hit, is that important to somebody? And in the good old days, you had two exit scenarios. One was an acquisition and one was an IPO. And so you could say, okay, is this reasonable for the public markets, or is this reasonable for an acquisition? Today the public markets are so tough that everybody's kind of looking for M&A, and so it's really, are these milestones sufficient to generate an M&A process that would be meaningful for us? And so yeah, they're always looking at that.
I just wasn't really sure whose shoulders that kind of fell on, because in theory you should be developing your company and trying to,
Right, and I agree with that. But if you don't figure out how to align that, there's the venture capitalists will see that as naivety, because they'll say, well, this person's asking me for money. Why do they think I'm giving them money? I'm giving, if it's your own personal money and you're investing in the stock market, you're not giving them the money just to hope that the stock goes down, or they just hit some nice, they do some great things, they do some great press releases. You want that stock price to go up. Venture capitalists are exactly the same way, and so it is your responsibility as CEO to manage those disparate views. Yes, you are trying to build your company, and you need to be focused on building your company, but you need to make sure that your corporate development goals are aligned with the goals of your venture capitalists, and that's really tricky sometimes. And it's one of the trickier things that I do at Apollo, and particularly when you have different venture capitalists on your board who have different exit horizons or expectations, and one person wants you to exit early for a smaller amount, the other one wants you to keep plugging money in and go for the bigger exit. Those are tough things, and your job as a CEO is to always be thinking about it from, how do I grow my business? Because you need their money, and if you don't answer that question for them, you're not going to get any more money from them. And then two, how do I break that fundraising up in a way that maximizes the chance of that exit? And so that's what your tranches are for, and that's why a venture capitalist, in medical devices, it's $80 to $100 million of cash from the day you say you're going to start your company to where your cash will break even, typically. And that's a lot of money. And they don't give it to you all at first. And so, it's building those milestones and those strategies that make you successful as a CEO, and having those financing strategies laid out and thought out that will give them confidence you know what you're doing.
Don't forget, the CEO of a company is responsible to all shareholders. And by this time in the growth of the company, some of your shareholders, your employees, who have become option holders and have exercised. So you've got your venture capitalists, your outside capital. You've got the people who've had sweat equity in them, like Dennis, who've actually started from the beginning, and others who've joined as employees with options. You're trying to protect all of them as shareholders.
And sometimes when you have a lot of venture people on your board, your tool with them sometimes is their fiduciary responsibility. If they do something that disparately treats a particular investor group or your common shareholders, and there's not a really good reason for doing that, they could have real exposure with that. And so, and it's actually, that's what drives a lot of time why venture capitalists don't like to do inside rounds. They like a new fund to come in and price the stock, because they know if they price the stock and they're too favorable with that to their own vein, then they have exposure with that. And so typically they'll do a flat round, or they'll do they want somebody else to come in and price it. That's a great question.
We have time for just one more question if there's anyone who has a question. Otherwise, I have one for Dennis. Dennis, parting piece of wisdom tonight. If every one of these folks in the room wanted to start a business, what should be their next step?
Getting the experience, however you can. Beg for that internship. Find an internship with a company. Work for free if you have to. I mean, that's what I did with her. Do that and get that experience so that you can have something on your resume that when you go to your first group of investors with your new idea, you're not so green with experience. I mean, and that gives you the best chance. I always tell people, it's like, you don't want to be the CEO of a startup company at the start of the company. You want to be the CEO at the harvest. That's how you make money. You don't make money being the guy who starts it and then you get canned by the venture group and you get diluted out along the way because you didn't know how to grow the company. And so building those skills and building that set of experiences is the most critical thing you can do. And then just don't have an ego about it. Just know that you don't know everything. It's impossible for you to know everything. And your job as the entrepreneur is to build that team of people who can run and manage that business. And if you do those two things while managing the exit potential of your investors, you'll do just fine. So.
I'd like to,
Yeah.
Hunter?
Yes, Hunter, yeah. What would I change with Apollo? I mean, hindsight's always really great to have with a startup company. And we made decisions where we prioritized certain products in our portfolio that at the time had a lot of sex appeal to them, but we knew in the back of our minds didn't have a lot of revenue potential. So we were kind of, back to my comment earlier about how do you build a company but manage the exit, we were skewing probably a little bit more to, hey, let's build some milestones on these really exciting products that will drive an exit conversation, an M&A conversation. But we kind of knew in the back of our mind we couldn't drive real revenue off of that. So if I had hindsight, I would have switched the prioritization of that, gone for the revenue generators first, which is what we did in 2009. But by that time, the markets had crashed and it was harder to raise money. So that'd be the one thing, and that'd probably be the number one thing that I do. But.
Dennis, you've had success once before. I'm sure you're going to do it again. You are a fabulous entrepreneur. Fabulous for him to come and join us tonight and share these experiences. Please join me in thanking Dennis McWilliams.
Good.
For those of you who can stay, please come up and network with Dennis and amongst yourselves. We have a reception outside. Next week, September 18th, Gail Page from Vermilion will be here, which is a publicly traded company, an entrepreneur who has taken that company public and will share those experiences with us too. So I encourage you to come. Same time next Tuesday, doors open at 5:30. Session starts promptly at 6. We'll be promptly over at 7 so that we can have refreshments and food and really do what's most powerful in the networking world of entrepreneurship is getting together and talking. Again, thanks for coming. Dennis.
Great, thank you, everybody.